The reality is that in Kenya, generally, there hasn't been a lot of conversation in terms of what are some of the local brands that are engaging in the sportswear business. And today on the show, I'm joined by Navalayo Osembo, who's going to be talking to us about Enda Sportswear.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for finding time. Maybe for somebody who hasn't come across Enda Sportswear, I would like to understand why the name Enda and what Enda Sportswear is about.
So I'll start the other way around. I'll say Enda Sportswear is a company that is working with Kenyan athletes to make running shoes for runners around the world. We started the company because we realized that as a country, we don't really take advantage of our sporting prowess, especially in long distance running. And so, the thought behind Enda was why not make running shoes in Kenya because we have the best athletes. The name itself was inspired by how people would cheer for athletes when they're just about to cross the finish line or they're about to, if it's football or rugby, when they're about to score, and the crowd will be on its feet and everybody will be shouting, Enda, 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 and so that's how we decided, that's the best way to name the company and to really establish a private sector presence in sports that will benefit athletes in future and other sports as well.
Okay, that's quite a creative way to come up with the name. I mean, rallying towards a name that people can relate with. The reality is that running a sportswear, actually the first one that is majorly known in Kenya, hasn't been quite that easy. Maybe for
Yes.
somebody who would want to understand how was the whole ideation process for you guys? Because right now people know Enda Sportswear as a household name, but it didn't quite start from there. Maybe what are some of the things that you had to put in place before now you had to go full blown out as Enda Sportswear?
I'm smiling because I'm happy to hear that it is considered a household name. We're working really hard to get the brand out there. So thank you for that compliment. When we started it, we were basically looking at what's the fastest and easiest way to get into the sports industry. And so the process really went through a review of what are the sports that, would make sense. And running stood out as that one low-hanging fruit, very big opportunity. People understand Kenyans to be runners, and so we decided to focus on running. And then the next step was, okay, are we going to do running apparel or are we going to do footwear? And we figured out apparel is, I don't want to say easy because businesses are difficult and complex, but it felt like it wouldn't really be as unique as a footwear running company performance, especially because the great athletes are here in Kenya. And so that's how we decided to make running shoes. And after that, we focused on getting a prototype. Once we got the prototype, we went to crowdfunding to basically secure our first orders. And through that first initial crowdfunding is how we were able to get the capital to start the business. And now we are growing like that. We started with one shoe, and now we are launching two more products. So in total, we'll have four products in the market by the end of the year.
Okay. Maybe somebody, most people when most business and they're starting, I don't know who took people to school or who told them that for a business to be successful, it has to be based in Nairobi. Finally, Enda Sportswear is not, the plant itself is not based in Nairobi. What are probably the inspiration behind that? And how has that worked in the favor of Enda Sportswear?
So I would say it was more of pure chance, like serendipity in terms of where we ended up. First of all, we did talk to a manufacturer in Nairobi, but they didn't have the capacity for us, and they were also about to close off their shoe business. Then we talked to others in Limuru. We talked to a lot of different people, and we finally settled in Kilifi, in Kikambala. The reason why we did that was we found a really good partner with Umoja Shoe Company. Umoja Rubber Products is right along Kikambala, and it worked for us because, first of all, the location. I think it matters that you put manufacturing places in locations that make a difference. Like they're a huge employer of the local community for miles around, and that was one of the things that pulled us to them. Secondly, we liked their visionary approach towards footwear, and they were willing to work with us, being the most important thing. So the more you, again, I agree, like I feel like Nairobi has managed to, because most of governments are the government's arms are concentrated in Nairobi, but I do think now with devolution and counties, that's kind of like going away slowly. But I'd say the key thing for us is to manufacture and to be in communities where you make a difference, and that's where we are and where we are proud of being, providing opportunities for members of our community.
Okay. It's not easy being a woman in sports. I mean, how from being an athlete, to now getting into an administrative position like you are at the moment. Um, I would like to understand how different has it been for you to break out there, because the system is already in favor of men in one way or another. That's a conversation that I keep on mentioning. It's a tough one, which people are not willing to talk about. But the reality is that the system is already set up in a favor of the men. So how was it challenging for you, or what are some of the hurdles that you probably had to get through as a woman in sport generally?
Yeah, and start by clarifying that I am not an athlete. I feel like that devalues the work of athletes that they put in, and I'm nowhere close to where they are. But kind of just someone who saw the opportunity and is working with them to create it. I would say you're right, and I agree with you that a lot of people do not want to have that conversation about gender. But I would add that the focus, at least my focus, is to just look at the business in terms of what needs to be done and how uh, to do it. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the people in the industry, whether you're looking at from the raw materials to actual production to selling, those roles are occupied by mostly men. And I think that's the thing where I'm like, okay, what are the things that are holding women back? What are the challenges? And I'd say one of the things that has really helped us is, as I mentioned before, we're partnering with Umoja. So the contract manufacturing helped us to start without having to have excess capital to set up a factory. So I think when you look at things like those, like what causes women to not be in business, lack of capital, how do you bridge that? You find partners who have the capital and can bring them together. Those are the things to consider when you're looking at how do you increase the number of women, particularly in manufacturing. You'll find women, but they'll mostly be at the service level, whether they're sitting or they're doing the labor part. But when it comes to the higher you go, the lesser the women they are. So I'd say for myself, as I mentioned, it's just more focusing on the work and what needs to be done, but at the same time, trying to figure out how do we make the environment conducive enough so that I and Enda are not outliers, that there are other people who can follow the same path and establish businesses similar to ours.
Okay. The reality is part of the reason why there aren't so many women in sports, so to speak, either from an athlete. At least right now, things are changing a bit. What are some of the things that probably you think corporates can do to create a conducive environment for women in sports to flourish?
I think much has been discussed. I'll kind of just summarize the key things that come to mind. I think the first thing is making, first of all, sponsoring. Like sponsoring athletes makes a big difference, whether male or female, but particularly for women athletes, you'll find most of their contracts are performance based. So as long as you're running, you're good. And it's not even as long as you're running, as long as you're on top of your running, you're hitting the targets that you're set. So it doesn't leave room for things like being pregnant, taking care of the family, some things that primarily fall on on the backs of women. And so when women take time off, then they become penalized for it. So I would say considering sponsorship program that is holistic, and I think the world is moving towards that. If you look at what's happening around globally, but to create a sponsorship contract that isn't purely strictly based on performance. And then it's also recognizing the value of women. Like I think, especially now with social media and with everybody being in a position to see what's going on around the world, I think we can encourage more women to step out and also just like share how their lives are and things like that. You'll see, for example, if you're looking at athletes in the US or in Europe, you basically can follow them and, like they have a huge fan base. Whereas if you ask our athletes, we don't really know what's going on. Like they've not really caught up to the digital age. So coming, especially from a local perspective, if you're sponsoring, it's not just money, but also how can we help build the profile so that they can also make money from other sponsorship deals that are unrelated to running, and they can also create their own businesses.
Interesting thing that you mentioned there, like sort of like helping brands or individual in the women in sports category to build their profile. A major partnership that is coming up is between you and ELBL. That's something that you're currently getting into. Maybe you can talk about that and how you think that is going to help Enda Sports, and why it was important for you to partner with an international brand. EABL is something that is already, it's a powerhouse within the region. So how was it important for you to partner with them?
I have to say the role that EABL has played, particularly through the Tusker brand, is significant. I cannot even put into words. When I say significant, sadly, it's just a word, but it has been a not just the investment, but also the symbolism of what should be done. Like, here's a brand, a heritage brand that has been built for so many years, kind of like taking the hand of a smaller brand and saying, like, let's work together. I think that is the future in terms of how brands can grow, B, how to, especially in a country like Kenya, how do you create global brands? There's not many brands that are international coming from Kenya, but there are many international brands in Kenya, including EBL. And so how do we leverage on a partnership like that to spotlight small businesses like Enda? And thirdly, it's also the walking the talk. A lot of people would be like, and the same for us when it comes to saying supporting athletes, and we actually support athletes. So it's the same thing when we say support small businesses. Tusker didn't just say support; it like walked the walk with us. It was like a long process and kind of like discussions. But I admire them for not just speaking, but also partnering with us. So it was a huge honor to work with Tusker on this project, and we hope it's the beginning of many between us and Tusker, but also between other international brands and local brands in Kenya.
Okay. I would have wished to have this conversation with you a bit earlier, but probably for one reason, things will have not been possible. I would like to understand your sentiments on probably being part of the Tokyo Olympics team, partnering with the athletes that were going to the Tokyo Olympics. What I would like to understand how you felt at that particular moment, because Tokyo Olympics is a global activity. Now here, Enda Sportswear is part of Team Kenya as they head to the Olympics. What did that mean to Enda Sportswear?
That meant everything, actually. If you understand the rules of the Olympics and how things go, it's pretty much because of intellectual property rights. It's not everybody who can, talk about the Olympics during the time for Olympics, or, unless you're like a sponsored brand. And that's something that was a huge obstacle for us in terms of we are a Kenyan brand, we are working with athletes, we are developing running shoes for runners around the world. But because we don't have enough money to sponsor the Olympics, we can't really talk about the Olympics even though we're in Kenya. And so because Tusker was literally an official partner, or the official partner for the Olympics, they basically made a way for us to be able to be part of the Olympics without necessarily having to, meet the obstacle of having so much money to sponsor the Olympics. We don't have that kind of resources. And that's what I was talking about earlier in terms of opening doors for others. And so while we were not able to directly provide running shoes and other kits for Olympics, we were able to, through Tusker, create trainers for the team. And I think that was amazing that the shoes have both the Tusker logo, they have the National Olympics team or committee label, and it just felt special to be able to create something from home, like something that the athletes can wear. And because of Tusker's, creating that opportunity, that Enda got to be a part of that. So it was actually very monumental. Like, as a small brand, it made a really big difference.
Okay. I know as a local brand, the common misconception is, oh, if Kenya something is manufactured in Kenya, it's very expensive. I'm gonna have to sell my kidney or sell my lungs before I get a Kenyan product. How important is it for people to probably understand to change this perception? Because it's hurting a lot of local brands.
Yeah, I would say, like learn to question, peel back and ask why is it expensive? Because cost of electricity is expensive, cost of fuel is expensive, import tax, VAT, like by the time something is basically seated on a shelf for it to be offered to you, there are certain things that a business has had to do in terms of resources to be able to make it available. And so if the consumer does not educate themselves from a perspective of why, then it's easy to just look at local brands and say, why do they keep on making expensive things? Why can't you sell a shoe for 1,500? And I'm like, 1,500 is not even, the cost of the raw materials, or if you want something quality, the kind of technology that goes into it. So I'd say first, the consumer needs to be able to question and say why a product like this. I guarantee you will learn quite a few things about why products are priced the way they are and what challenges entrepreneurs are going to face. And when that happens, then you find that the market has empathy. They are like, I really understand your struggles, or I'm really proud of you for going through this, so I really want to support your business. So that's important. And secondly, I think there's a lot of people who've said that's our mentality. We when we started the business, we also thought that would be a limitation. However, our growth in the Kenyan market has basically exceeded what we thought. People are buying, people are supporting, and one thing I've learned is less focus on cost, more focus on value. What are you giving in terms of the utility of the product, in terms of the pride, in terms of the storytelling? Once I feel like your value is worth my money, then I will, do it. I will leap up pole pole. I will, I will buy. I will talk about it. And so I think it's more of, as I said before, having an educated consumer, and on the other hand, um, like I do feel like that mindset is changing, where people are like, a Kenyan good quality goods. I actually see Kenyan supporting local brands, and I think it's a good trend.
Okay. Navalayo, there are people going to be watching this interview. I want you to send a message to probably people who have that perception. What do you have to tell them? Why is it important for them to support local brands?
I would say, we have to think about how we change in the future. And sometimes we think like we can't really change as an individual. But if you look at the context of small businesses, in Kenya, at least, they're up to like 90% of businesses are SMEs or family owned or one of the other. And so if we are able to grow these businesses to be able to employ one more person or support one more person, then we're actually changing the unemployment statistics. We are expanding the local supply chain because, for example, if I sell groundnuts, for example, then I'll be able to buy tins from the next person. Like it's a whole ecosystem. And so if we do not recognize how we are all cogs on like a gear, it doesn't matter how small that cog is. If the cog is not in place, the whole system doesn't work. And I feel like people feel more hopeless, like I can't do anything about the economy. I'm like, yes, you can. Go to your local tax shop, go find local suppliers, go find local businesses. Because ultimately, for the wheels of economic change to happen, for poverty to kind of like be lifted, for people to have jobs that give them dignity, you, the person who thinks you're insignificant, you're that small cog. And if you don't move, the whole system doesn't move. So we need you to support small businesses so that we are all moving in tandem.